Poor black maid accidentally hugs Mafia Boss at airport. He looks at her and says, "Now you're mine." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The airport terminal was bustling with travelers rushing to their gates, luggage wheels clicking against the polished floors as people hurried to catch their flights. Among the crowd, a young woman, dressed in a simple but worn-out uniform, navigated the chaos with quiet determination. She was tired, physically exhausted from the long shift she had just finished at a nearby hotel. Her name was Tasha, a maid working long hours to support her family back home. She had no choice but to work double shifts, leaving her with little time to relax or even think about herself. Her destination was a small apartment she rented in a rundown part of the city. As she walked past a row of gates, she accidentally bumped into a tall, broad-shouldered man, causing her to drop her purse and stagger back slightly. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," she muttered, quickly kneeling to gather her things. The man didn't say anything at first. Instead, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that immediately put her on edge. She could feel his gaze drilling into her, a sense of danger radiating from him. As she stood up and began to walk away, trying to ignore the odd feeling creeping up her spine, she felt a strong hand grab her wrist, pulling her back. She gasped, heart racing, and looked up into the eyes of the man who had stopped her. His expression was cold and unreadable, but there was something about the way he held her that made her feel both scared and strangely intrigued. "You should be more careful, sweetheart," he said, his voice low and commanding. Tasha tried to pull away, but his grip tightened just enough to stop her. His eyes were sharp, assessing her with a cold, calculating look. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now but still carrying that authoritative edge. Tasha nodded quickly, her breath coming out in short gasps. She didn't know who this man was, but the way he looked at her made her feel small, insignificant. "I'm fine. I'm sorry," she stammered, her heart still pounding in her chest. The man didn't let go of her wrist immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her with an unsettling intensity. "No, you're not fine. You're hiding something," he said, his words sending a chill down her spine. Tasha opened her mouth to protest, but the words died in her throat. Who was he to accuse her of hiding something? She didn't know him, didn't know why he was even talking to her, but something about the way he spoke made her doubt herself. The man slowly let go of her wrist, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly as she took a step back. She wanted to escape, to disappear into the crowd and forget this strange encounter, but before she could turn away, he spoke again. "Now you're mine," he said, his voice cold and final. Tasha froze, her body stiffening in shock. His words hung in the air like a threat, heavy and suffocating. She didn't know what to make of it, but something told her this encounter was far from over. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. Tasha couldn't believe what had just happened. Her heart was still racing from the encounter, her pulse pounding in her ears. She quickly glanced around, trying to make sense of the situation, but the man, whose presence was so dominating, seemed to stand out even more in the crowded airport terminal. His words replayed in her mind like an echo. "Now you're mine." It was absurd. She didn't know him, didn't even know his name. Yet something about him made her feel like a small fish in the presence of a predator. She wanted to brush it off, to chalk it up to an overreaction, but his cold grip on her wrist and the intense look in his eyes stayed with her. Tasha had dealt with difficult people before. As a maid, she had encountered all types of rich, powerful clients who treated her like an invisible servant. But this was different. This man, this mafia boss, was something else entirely. Her thoughts swirled as she walked to her gate, her hands shaking as she checked her flight details. Was this some kind of misunderstanding? Had he been joking? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something much bigger than she could handle. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. It was a message from her brother, a simple text reminding her to call their mom when she got home. Tasha sighed, running a hand through her hair. She didn't have time for any more distractions, especially not with her family's constant pressure to do more, be more, just to make ends meet. She didn't have the luxury of worrying about strange men at airports. She had a life to get back to. But as she continued toward her gate, she couldn't help but feel like she was being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she glanced over her shoulder, but the airport was as busy as ever. Yet, the nagging feeling remained. It wasn't until she found her seat and tried to relax that she saw him again, his tall figure slipping through the crowd, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk looking for prey. Panic seized her chest as he locked eyes with her. She quickly looked away, hoping he hadn't recognized her, but there was no denying the unmistakable force of his presence. She had to get away. As the flight began to board, Tasha clutched her purse tightly, heart racing, her thoughts a blur of anxiety. She had just taken her seat when, to her horror, the man appeared in the aisle, standing right beside her. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice smooth, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. Tasha froze. There was no escaping now. She was trapped. "I don't think that's necessary," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, but it betrayed her nerves. She looked up at him, the same cold gaze meeting hers. "I think it is," he replied calmly, before sitting down next to her. She could feel the weight of his presence, like a force field around her, making the small space feel even more confined. The flight attendants were too busy with other passengers to notice, and Tasha didn't know what to do. Her mind raced. Was this some kind of power move? Was he going to confront her? She could barely breathe, and every time she stole a glance at him, his eyes were still locked on her, unblinking. It wasn't long before he spoke again, his tone still calm, but carrying a certain sharpness. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" he said. Tasha turned her head slightly, trying to hide her trembling hands in her lap. She had no idea what he wanted from her. All she wanted was to disappear, to forget the encounter ever happened. But somehow, she knew that wouldn't be an option. "I don't understand what you want from me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the plane's engine. "You'll understand soon enough," he said cryptically, his voice still low but steady. "But for now, I need you to stay close to me. I'm not done with you yet." Tasha swallowed hard, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. This was crazy. He was crazy. And yet, there was a part of her, an unsettling part, that couldn't help but be intrigued by him. The rest of the flight was a blur of quiet tension. Every time she tried to close her eyes, his words haunted her. "I'm not done with you yet." She had no idea what that meant, but she knew, deep down, that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly prepare for. When the plane finally touched down and the passengers began to disembark, the Mafia Boss was there, standing just behind her as she gathered her things. He didn't say another word as she exited the plane, but the weight of his presence never left her. She glanced over her shoulder once more as she walked into the terminal. This time, he wasn't there, but the strange feeling that he was still watching her lingered, and with it, a terrifying sense of inevitability. The days that followed were a blur for Tasha. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the Mafia Boss whose cold gaze seemed to pierce through her very soul. He had said he was not done with her yet, and she couldn't shake the feeling that his words carried more weight than just a casual statement. It wasn't long before she realized the truth. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to imagine. After disembarking the plane, Tasha had thought she was finally free, that she could escape the tension that had been hanging over her. But when she reached the airport exit, she found herself standing in front of the same man again, his dark eyes following her every move. "You didn't think I'd let you go that easily, did you?" His voice was like a velvet warning, smooth but carrying a deadly edge. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon, let alone have him confront her like this. "What do you want from me?" Tasha managed to ask, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. He took a step closer, his towering presence forcing her to take a step back. "It's not about what I want," he said, his voice lowering. "It's about what you need." He didn't elaborate, but the intensity in his gaze was enough to make her shiver. Tasha tried to hold her ground, but everything in her screamed to run. She had no idea why he was still following her, or why he was so insistent on making her a part of his world. But one thing was clear, she couldn't escape him. As they made their way through the terminal, the man remained by her side, his presence never more than a few steps behind her. Tasha felt like a bird trapped in a cage, and no matter how hard she tried to break free, the cage door remained closed. She glanced nervously at her phone, hoping for some kind of distraction, but all she saw was a message from her mom, asking her when she would be home. Tasha's heart tightened. She didn't want to be dragged into something she couldn't control. But no matter how much she tried to distance herself from this man, he wouldn't let her go. "You're coming with me," he said suddenly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Tasha opened her mouth to protest, but before she could get a word out, he motioned for her to follow him. The airport's hustle and bustle seemed to fade away as they walked through the corridors, her mind racing with every step. She had no idea where they were headed or what he intended to do with her. All she knew was that she couldn't resist. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, but she stayed. For reasons she couldn't explain, she felt an overwhelming pull to stay close to him. It wasn't fear, at least not entirely, but something else. Something more confusing. They reached a sleek black SUV parked at the curb, its tinted windows hiding the interior. The man opened the door for her and gestured for her to get in. Tasha hesitated, but the look in his eyes told her there was no choice. She climbed in, the door shutting with a soft click behind her. The moment the engine roared to life, the tension between them was palpable. Tasha sat in the passenger seat, her body rigid, her heart pounding as she stared straight ahead, trying to make sense of what was happening. She glanced at him, but he wasn't looking at her. His eyes were focused on the road, his jaw tight with concentration. "You don't need to be scared," he said after a long silence, his voice almost kind, yet laced with an underlying command. "You're in my world now, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you." The words were supposed to be reassuring, but all they did was confuse her further. "Why?" Tasha asked softly. "Why me?" He glanced at her for a brief moment, the faintest flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he looked back at the road. "Because I saw something in you," he said, his voice low and steady. "Something worth protecting." Tasha didn't know what to say. She couldn't understand what had made her stand out to him, or why he had taken such an interest in her. All she knew was that she was caught in the web of a dangerous man who controlled everything around him. The SUV turned onto a quiet street, away from the chaos of the airport, and Tasha couldn't help but wonder where they were going. Her heart was racing, her thoughts spinning, and her gut told her that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. She had stepped into a world of power, violence, and secrets that she wasn't ready for. The man beside her, the one who had captured her attention with his cold eyes and commanding presence, wasn't just any stranger. He was someone who held the reins of a dangerous empire. And somehow, she had found herself caught in the center of it. The drive felt like it lasted an eternity. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound between them as the man, still a stranger to her in many ways, guided the black SUV through the city streets. Tasha's mind was spinning. Her palms were sweaty as she tried to control her breathing, but it felt like the air in the car was thick, heavy with unanswered questions. Who was this man? What did he want from her? The power he exuded made it impossible to ignore him, yet she had no idea where this was leading. She thought about the moment they'd first met at the airport, the way his hand had gripped her wrist, the way his words had hung in the air like a promise. "Now you're mine." It didn't make sense. Nothing about this situation made sense. But as she sat beside him, her body tense, she realized that she wasn't in control here. She hadn't been in control since the moment he'd touched her. Tasha glanced at him again, trying to read his expression. His focus was still on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. He was calm, too calm. It almost felt like he was studying her, waiting for something, as though she was the puzzle he needed to solve. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm, a little more brave than she had felt before. "You'll see soon enough," he replied without taking his eyes off the road. His tone was curt, but not unkind. It was that calmness again. It was like he was used to controlling every moment of his life, and now he was in control of this one too. 1,000 thoughts raced through Tasha's mind. She had been raised to be strong, independent. But in this moment, she felt vulnerable, exposed. She couldn't trust him, but there was something in the way he carried himself, something magnetic and dangerous, that made it hard for her to keep her guard up. The city skyline loomed in the distance as they approached a more secluded area. The buildings here were older, their facades worn down by time. The air felt different, thicker somehow, as though the very streets held secrets. The SUV slowed as they turned into a private, gated driveway. The gates opened without a sound, and the vehicle glided past. Tasha couldn't help but glance out the window. The mansion that awaited them was massive, imposing, even. It looked like something out of a movie. Grand columns, dark stone, and manicured gardens. As the car came to a stop in front of the entrance, Tasha's heart skipped a beat. This was where he lived. This was the world he controlled. "Get out," he said, his voice breaking her train of thought. She hesitated for a moment, but something in the way he said it made her move. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid or fascinated. The door of the SUV opened, and she stepped out, the cool night air hitting her face. She was immediately struck by the silence, an eerie, almost unnatural quiet, as though the house itself was watching her. The man was already at the front door, waiting for her. His presence was like a shadow, always just there, always looming. Tasha followed him inside, her eyes wide as she took in the lavish interior. The marble floors gleamed in the low lighting, the chandeliers above casting soft shadows. The place was beautiful in a way that felt too cold, too perfect. "Come with me," he said, his voice carrying through the vast, empty space. He led her through a long hallway that seemed to stretch forever. As they walked, Tasha could hear the faint sound of music playing somewhere in the background, the soft notes adding to the surreal atmosphere. They stopped in front of a large wooden door. He opened it without a word, revealing a luxurious study. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a massive desk sat in the center of the room. Tasha's eyes scanned the space, but she didn't feel any more at ease. There was something about this place, this man, that made her feel small, insignificant. "Sit," he instructed, pointing to a chair across from his desk. She obeyed, not sure what else to do. The chair was uncomfortable, its hard surface a stark contrast to the plush surroundings. He walked around the desk and sat in the chair behind it, his posture relaxed, but there was no mistaking the power that radiated from him. "You're here because I saw something in you," he said, his voice cool and deliberate. "Something worth protecting." Tasha frowned. "Protecting? From what?" "I'm not sure what you think I have to offer," she said, her voice wavering slightly. She wasn't sure if she should be angry or terrified, but the confusion was starting to wear on her. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes locking onto hers. "You'll understand soon enough," he said. His words were cryptic, but there was something in his gaze that made her believe he wasn't lying. It wasn't just about power. It wasn't just about control. It was about something deeper, something personal. Tasha wasn't sure she was ready to understand it, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. Tasha sat in the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. The weight of the room pressed down on her. Rich leather chairs, towering bookshelves filled with expensive volumes, and walls adorned with dark artwork. She was out of her element, a small fish in a sea of power and privilege. The man who sat across from her, the Mafia Boss, watched her with an intensity that made her skin crawl and yet, strangely, made her feel like she couldn't look away. His eyes were dark, calculating, yet there was something else beneath that cold exterior. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice breaking the silence. "Why me? Why did you bring me here?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of his face, his gaze never leaving her. "You're different," he replied, his voice low and measured. "You're not like the others." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what he meant by that, but something told her it wasn't a compliment. She didn't belong in this world. She barely belonged in this room. "I don't even know who you are," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "What do you want from me?" The man remained silent for a moment, his eyes scanning her face, as though he was looking for something. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost as if he was speaking to himself more than to her. "I want you to trust me." Tasha blinked, shocked by his words. Trust him? After everything that had happened? After he had made her feel so small and insignificant? After he had told her she was his? Now he expected her to trust him. "I don't know how to trust someone like you," she said quietly, her throat tight with emotion. You don't know anything about me. He leaned forward slightly, his expression hardening. I know more about you than you think. Tasha's heart sank. What did that mean? Was he watching her? Had he been following her? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. I've watched you, he continued, his voice cold. I've watched you struggle, work yourself to the bone, and still, you get up every day. That's the kind of strength I need. Tasha's eyes widened. What are you talking about? What do you want from me? I'm offering you a chance, he said, his voice taking on an almost predatory edge. A chance to step into a world where you don't have to struggle anymore. A world where you have power, where you have a place. Tasha shook her head, trying to make sense of his words. I don't want your world, she replied, her voice firm. I don't need your help. The man studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. You will need it, he said quietly. Sooner than you think. His words sent a shiver down her spine, but she refused to let him see her fear. She wasn't going to be intimidated by him. She wasn't going to let him control her. I don't belong here, she said, standing up from the chair. I don't belong in your world, and I don't want to. The man stood as well, his tall frame towering over her. You don't get to decide that, he said softly, but his tone was final. You're already in it, whether you like it or not. Tasha took a step back, her heart racing. What does that mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It means, he said, his eyes never leaving hers, that you're mine now. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the blood draining from her face as the weight of his words hit her. She had no idea what he meant, but she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. She had just entered a world she couldn't escape from, and now she was tangled in a web of power, control, and danger. Her pulse raced as she backed toward the door. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. The man, still watching her, didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't letting her go. Not now. Not ever. Tasha could feel her heartbeat in her ears as she walked down the hallway, her steps echoing off the cold marble floors. The man's words, "You're mine now," hung in the air, impossible to shake off. She had tried to convince herself it was just a power play, an attempt to intimidate her. But the look in his eyes, the way he had said it, had made it clear that he wasn't joking. She wasn't sure how much longer she could stand being in this mansion, surrounded by walls that seemed to close in on her with every passing moment. The weight of his gaze still lingered, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had to get out, but where could she go? This was his world now, and she was just a pawn in his game. She didn't belong here. She wasn't like him, cold, powerful, controlling. Yet here she was, tangled in a web she couldn't escape. The front door loomed ahead of her, and for a brief moment, she thought about running. She could leave this place, take a cab back to the airport, and start over. But she knew it wouldn't be that simple. No matter how far she ran, she would never be free of him. He was everywhere, his presence filling every room, every corner of her mind. As she reached the door, it swung open, and there he was again. The Mafia Boss, his dark eyes locking onto hers with the same intensity as before. I see you're trying to leave, he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. Tasha froze, her hand still on the doorknob. I'm not leaving, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just need some space. The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped forward, closing the distance between them with a single stride. Space, he repeated, as though the word was foreign to him. You have all the space you need in my world. His words felt like a trap, and Tasha's stomach twisted. She pulled her hand away from the door, her body tense with the anticipation of what was coming next. I didn't ask for any of this, she said, her voice shaking. I don't want to be a part of your world. I don't belong here. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He simply stood there, watching her with those piercing eyes, as though trying to read her every thought. You don't have a choice, he finally said, his voice soft but firm. You're already part of it, whether you like it or not. Tasha felt a chill run down her spine. There was no escaping him. No matter how hard she tried to push him away, he was always there, watching, waiting. She had no idea what he wanted from her, but she was starting to realize that she might never find out. This was the beginning of something bigger than she could imagine. He stepped aside, his expression unreadable as he gestured for her to follow him. Come, he said simply. I'm not going to hurt you, but you need to understand what you're really a part of. Tasha hesitated for a moment, her heart racing, but eventually, she followed him down the hallway. She didn't know what else to do. She was caught in a world of power and violence, and there was no turning back. The man led her into a large room, one with dark wood paneling and a massive desk at the center. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with expensive leather-bound books, and the air smelled of rich cologne and something else, something she couldn't quite place. The man motioned for her to sit in a chair across from him, and she did, her legs feeling unsteady as she lowered herself into it. This is my world, he said, his tone calm but serious. You don't have to understand it right away, but you need to accept that you're a part of it now. You're here because I've decided you're useful to me. Tasha swallowed hard, her throat dry. I'm not useful to you, she said, her voice almost a whisper. I don't even know who you are. I don't know anything about this world you're talking about. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. You will, he replied. But right now, you just need to trust me. Trust that I won't hurt you. Tasha didn't know if she could trust him, but she also didn't know how much longer she could keep fighting. This was his world, and she was just a guest. Or maybe more than that. Maybe she was something much more important to him than she realized. I'm not here to hurt you, he repeated. I'm here to protect you. Tasha looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something in his eyes now, something softer. He wasn't the same man who had looked at her like she was a piece of property. But she wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Why protect me? She asked, her voice full of confusion. I'm just a maid. He shook his head, his gaze never leaving hers. You're not just a maid, Tasha, he said quietly. You're more than that. You'll see. Tasha's head was spinning. She had been in this mansion for what felt like days, yet every room she stepped into made her feel more and more like a stranger in a foreign land. The man who had claimed her as his, who had said she was his, was now watching her like a hawk, following her every move with a calculating eye. It felt suffocating, but there was also an undeniable pull. He was a powerful man, and somehow, she was becoming more entangled in his world with every passing minute. The reality of her situation was hitting her harder than ever before. She wasn't just someone working in his house. She had been dragged into something far bigger than she could have imagined. The days blurred together. There were no more simple tasks. No more quiet moments in her room. No more cleaning up after the rich guests who stayed in his mansion. Everything had changed the moment she stepped into this world. Every time she tried to slip away, he was there, his presence looming, watching her from the corners of every room. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. There was something else, something magnetic about him that made it impossible to completely push him away. That morning, after a restless night filled with half-sleep and tangled thoughts, she found herself back in the study with him. He had summoned her. His words the night before were still echoing in her head. You're not just a maid, Tasha. You're more than that. She didn't understand it. How could she possibly be more than that? She was just a woman trying to survive, trying to make her way in a world that had never been kind to her. The grandness of the mansion, the wealth, the luxury, it wasn't her world. But now here she was. Sit, he commanded in his usual calm tone, pulling her from her thoughts. She obeyed, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. He wasn't smiling. There was no warmth in his expression, only the same intensity she had come to expect. His gaze never wavered as he studied her, and it made her feel like he was dissecting every part of her. You don't belong here, Tasha, he said finally, breaking the silence. She blinked, surprised by his words. I didn't ask to be here, she replied, her voice tight. I didn't ask for any of this. He leaned forward, his fingers resting on the desk in front of him, his gaze never leaving her face. No, he agreed, but you're here now, and I'm not letting you go. His words were a quiet, firm promise, and it sent a chill through her spine. She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need him, that she could leave any time. But something in the way he looked at her made her think otherwise. She had already tried to leave, tried to run, and yet here she was. I don't know why you think I'm useful to you, she said, her frustration growing. I'm just a maid. I'm nothing special. He smiled then, a small, knowing smile, and it sent a shiver down her spine. You're not just anything, he said, his voice suddenly softer, more sincere. You're someone who sees the world for what it is, someone who's survived when others would have broken. She didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't strong. She was just trying to get by, trying to make a living, to keep her family afloat. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a savior. She was just a woman who had learned to hide her true feelings behind a mask. I don't want to be here, she whispered, looking down at her hands in her lap. She felt vulnerable again, the walls she had built around herself slipping away. You don't have a choice, he said firmly. I've already decided. You're going to be part of this. Tasha felt the weight of his words settle over her. She had no choice. She was already in his world, and there was no way out. She opened her mouth to protest again, but he raised a hand, stopping her. I'm not asking you to like it, he said. I'm not even asking you to understand. I just need you to trust me. She didn't answer right away. Trust him? She couldn't trust anyone, especially not a man who controlled everything in his path. But there was something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't trying to break her. He was trying to protect her. The thought was absurd. She didn't want protection. She didn't need him to save her. She could take care of herself. But she had learned the hard way that survival wasn't always as simple as that. She couldn't do this alone. And as much as it scared her, as much as it confused her, she knew she had no choice. She was in this now. She was in his world. And there was no going back. I don't know if I can trust you, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I don't even know what you want from me. He stood up then, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. He didn't say anything at first, just looked down at her with an unreadable expression. I don't want anything from you, Tasha, he said quietly. Not yet, anyway. But you'll see. You'll understand why I brought you here. Why you're more important to me than you realize. Tasha looked up at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to say something, anything, to push him away, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just sat there, staring into his dark eyes, feeling the weight of her reality crash down on her. She was here, and she wasn't leaving anytime soon. Tasha woke up the next morning to an overwhelming silence. The kind of silence that pressed in on her from all sides, making her feel like she was trapped in a space much too large for her. The bed she was lying in felt softer than any place she had ever known, the sheets so smooth and luxurious it was as though she were sleeping in a dream. But the reality of her situation hit her the moment she opened her eyes. She was still in his world. The man who had claimed her, whose presence she couldn't escape, whose words still haunted her every thought. The Mafia Boss. She had barely slept through the night, her mind racing with the events of the previous day. His words echoed in her head, over and over again. You're mine now. It felt like a weight on her chest, something heavy, something that threatened to crush her. She wasn't used to being this vulnerable, and yet here she was, tangled in his web, with no clear way out. She sat up in bed, running a hand through her hair as she glanced around the room. The suite she had been placed in was lavish, filled with expensive furniture, dark woods, and soft lighting that gave the room an almost intimate feel. It was a far cry from the cramped apartment she used to call home, and yet it felt wrong. She didn't belong here. Her eyes landed on the door, and for a split second, she thought about leaving, just walking out and finding her own way. But then she remembered his words. The way he had stopped her from leaving the mansion the day before. He wouldn't let her go. Not now. Not ever. The realization sank in like a stone in her stomach. She was trapped. She had no choice but to play by his rules. The question was, what did he want from her? Why had he chosen her? Tasha stood up from the bed, her legs weak as she tried to shake off the tension that had built up in her body. She walked toward the large window that overlooked the grounds of the mansion. The gardens were perfectly manicured, the sky a pale blue, and everything seemed peaceful from here. But Tasha knew better. She had seen enough in her life to know that appearances could be deceiving. She was staring at the life he had built, the empire he controlled, and she was a part of it now, for better or for worse. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock on the door. She tensed, her heart skipping a beat. She knew who it was. It had to be him, the man who had brought her into his world and now expected her to fit into it. Come in, she called, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. The door opened, and there he stood, tall, confident, and as unreadable as ever. The Mafia Boss. She had gotten used to the way his presence filled a room, how he didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. It was all in the way he carried himself, the way people obeyed him without question. "Good morning," he said, his voice low, smooth like velvet, but with that sharp edge she had come to recognize. "How did you sleep?" "I slept fine," Tasha replied, her voice guarded. She didn't know if he was testing her, or if he genuinely cared, but she wasn't going to show him any more weakness than she already had. She had to stay strong, no matter what. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I trust you're comfortable," he said, glancing around the suite. Tasha nodded, though she couldn't shake the unease in her stomach. "I don't need all of this," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I never asked for any of this." He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing her words carefully. "I know you didn't ask for it," he replied, his tone calm. But there was something in his eyes that made her feel like he was assessing her, understanding her in a way she couldn't quite explain. "But now that you're here, it's my responsibility to make sure you're safe. You don't have to like it, but you do need to accept it." Tasha clenched her fists at her sides. "Safe?" she repeated. "From what?" "From you." He didn't flinch at her accusation. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "No," he said softly. "From the world I've created. From the enemies I have. The threats that come with this life. You're safer here with me than anywhere else." Tasha didn't know how to respond. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she could handle herself, that she didn't need his protection. But the truth was, she didn't know how she would survive in this world, let alone without his protection. He seemed to read her thoughts because his next words came as if he had been waiting for her to say them. "I know this isn't what you expected," he said, "but you're in this now. You're part of my world, whether you want to be or not." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. She didn't want to be a part of his world. She didn't want any of this. But he was right. She had no choice. The realization hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she felt utterly powerless. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, his gaze unwavering. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer now, almost intimate. "I want you to understand that you're more important to me than you think." Tasha swallowed hard. She didn't know what that meant, but the way he said it made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something huge, something that could either break her or change her life forever. She wasn't sure which one it would be, but she knew she couldn't escape it. Not anymore. Tasha sat in the plush chair across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she stared at the man who had so firmly planted her into his world. The soft hum of the mansion's air conditioning seemed to fill the silence between them, but she couldn't shake the heaviness that clung to her every moment. She had asked him earlier what he wanted from her, and although his answer was vague, the words that followed stayed with her. "You're more important to me than you think." She hadn't understood what that meant, but somehow, in the way he spoke, in the way his gaze seemed to pierce through her, she knew it wasn't a simple statement. The truth was that she didn't belong here. She never had. But he was right in one way. She was now a part of his world, whether she liked it or not. And there was no way out. Not anymore. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the frustration building inside her again. "I didn't ask for you, for any of this." The man across from her didn't flinch. His eyes remained steady, fixed on her as if he were studying her, observing every small shift in her expression. "I know," he replied softly. "But you're here, and now you're mine." The way he said it, so calm, so certain, made the words feel like a weight on her chest. Tasha clenched her fists. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him she wasn't his to claim, that she wasn't some possession to be kept under lock and key. But the more she tried to push back, the more it felt like she was falling into his grasp. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in, her breath coming a little faster. He didn't say anything else for a moment, but there was a change in his demeanor, a shift in the air. He stood up slowly, moving around the desk to stand in front of her. Tasha looked up at him, her heart hammering in her chest. He wasn't close enough to touch her, but his presence filled the space like a tidal wave, and she found herself trembling under his gaze. "I know this is hard for you," he said, his voice much gentler now. "But you need to understand something. You're a part of something much bigger now. You're not just here to serve me. You're here because I've chosen you to be part of my world." Tasha's chest tightened. Part of his world? She had no idea what that even meant. He was a mafia boss, someone who controlled everything around him with an iron fist. His world was dangerous, dark, and not a place she ever imagined herself being. I didn't ask for this world, she whispered, almost to herself. I didn't ask for any of it. He knelt down in front of her, his eyes softening just a little. I never said you asked for it, he said quietly. But you're here now, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you. His words, so simple and reassuring, didn't feel comforting. They felt like another cage being built around her. She didn't need his protection. She never had. She had survived on her own for so long, scraped by, done whatever it took to survive. But now, here she was, caught in a web of his making, unable to escape, unable to find her way back to the life she knew. I don't want to be here, Tasha said, her voice shaking slightly. I don't want to be your responsibility. He didn't respond right away, just studied her with those dark eyes. His silence made the tension in the room grow heavier, more suffocating. Finally, he spoke, his voice still calm, but this time there was a hint of something else behind it, something that felt almost like empathy. You're not a burden, Tasha, he said softly. You never have been. I'm not doing this to control you. I'm doing this because I see something in you. Something worth protecting. She looked at him, disbelief flooding her chest. Protecting, she repeated. Why would you want to protect me? He leaned in closer, his voice low but firm. Because you're stronger than you realize. And I need you to understand that. In my world, strength is everything. And you have it, Tasha. You just don't know it yet. She could barely comprehend his words. Was he really seeing her? Was he saying that she had something he wanted? Something worth protecting? The idea felt impossible, but the way he looked at her, the way he spoke, made her want to believe him. I'm not strong, she said quietly. I'm just trying to survive. He reached out then, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. His touch was firm, but not harsh. It was as though he was trying to anchor her in place, to make her feel something other than the fear and uncertainty that had taken over her. You've been surviving, yes, he said softly. But survival isn't the same as living. I want you to start living, Tasha. I want you to understand your worth, and how much you mean in this world. Tasha could feel the tears threatening to spill over, but she blinked them away, shaking her head. I don't belong here, she said again, her voice barely audible. I don't belong in your world. He stood up then, his eyes never leaving hers. You do now, he said simply. And that's all that matters. Tasha swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She wanted to fight him, wanted to scream that she wasn't part of this world, that she wasn't his. But deep down, she knew that the more she resisted, the more she was falling into his grasp. And there was no turning back. Not now. Not ever. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Tasha found herself in a constant state of unease, her mind struggling to reconcile the life she once knew with the one she was now forced to accept. The mansion was both beautiful and suffocating, its luxurious walls a constant reminder that she was a prisoner in a gilded cage. The man, her captor, her protector, was always there, always watching, his presence like a shadow over her every move. She couldn't escape him, not even in her thoughts. Every room in this mansion seemed to echo with his voice, his commands. He had told her she was important, that she was strong, but Tasha wasn't sure she could believe it. The weight of his gaze was heavy, and each time their eyes met, it felt like she was losing a piece of herself, slipping further into his world. He had told her she was more than just a maid, more than just a pawn in his game. But what did that mean? Tasha had been fighting for so long to survive, to carve out a space for herself in a world that didn't care about people like her. Now, here she was, trapped in a world she didn't want to be a part of, with no clear way out. She had tried to stay distant, tried to keep her emotions in check, but it was getting harder. The man's words, his touch, his overwhelming presence, everything about him pulled her closer, made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Vulnerability. And that terrified her. The last thing she wanted was to be vulnerable, to be at his mercy. But she was starting to realize that she wasn't as in control as she thought. That evening, as she was walking through the mansion's grand hallway, she saw him again. The Mafia Boss. He was standing by the large window, his back to her as he stared out at the sprawling estate. He turned slightly as she approached, his eyes immediately locking onto hers. You're still here, he said quietly, his voice soft but laced with something she couldn't quite place. Of course I'm still here, she replied, her voice steady. though she could feel the anxiety creeping into her chest. I haven't gone anywhere. You could leave, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. But I know you won't. Not yet. His words were oddly comforting and unsettling at the same time. It was as if he could see right through her, knew exactly what she was thinking. Tasha wanted to say something, wanted to push back, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just stood there, rooted to the spot. Why do you stay? He asked, his voice quieter now, almost curious. She swallowed hard, the question catching her off guard. She didn't have an answer, not one she could give him. I don't know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know why I stay. He took a step closer to her, the distance between them closing with an ease that made her heart race. Maybe you stay because deep down, you know you're meant to be here. With me. His words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Tasha's breath caught in her throat as she looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard him before, but now, standing this close, she could feel the weight of his presence more than ever. The way he looked at her made her feel both small and seen at the same time. It was overwhelming. I'm not sure what you want from me, she whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. I'm not like you. I'm not strong. He reached out then, his hand gently cupping her chin, his thumb brushing across her cheek. The touch was soft, but there was a power behind it that made her shiver. You are strong, he said quietly, his voice low and steady. Stronger than you realize. Tasha felt her pulse quicken at the feel of his touch, the warmth of his hand against her skin. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened ever so slightly, just enough to keep her in place. You don't know me, she said, her voice shaky. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, he replied, his voice calm and unshakable. I know that you're stronger than anyone else I've ever met. His words were strange, but there was a sincerity in them that made her question everything she had believed about herself. She had always seen herself as weak, as someone who had to fight for every scrap of her existence. But this man, this mafia boss, was looking at her like she was something else entirely, something worth protecting, something worth his attention. The thought terrified her. I'm not what you think I am, she said, trying to push him away, but he didn't move. Instead, he leaned closer, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, You're exactly what I think you are. And I won't let anyone harm you. The words felt like a promise, but also a warning. Tasha felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that this was more than just about her. This was about him, about the life he had built, and about the dangerous world he controlled. She was no longer a bystander. She was a part of it now, whether she wanted to be or not. His hand lingered on her cheek for a moment longer before he finally stepped back, breaking the connection between them. I need you to trust me, he said quietly. Trust that I won't let anything happen to you. Tasha nodded slowly, though she wasn't sure if she could trust him, if she could trust anyone. But the truth was, she didn't have a choice. She was already in too deep, and there was no way out now. The following days seemed to stretch on forever for Tasha, each moment in the mansion feeling like a step further into a life she never wanted. The man, his name, though she still rarely heard it, was always lingering in her mind, had made it clear she was part of his world now, whether she accepted it or not. He never stopped watching her, never stopped testing her limits, pushing her to either stay or leave. But how could she leave? Where would she go? She was trapped, surrounded by walls that held both luxury and danger. Every corner of the mansion held a secret. Every step she took in it only led to more questions. The more time she spent in his world, the more she realized just how much control he had over everything. Tasha spent her days trying to figure out her place in this strange, suffocating reality. The man had told her that she was stronger than she realized. But how could she be strong in a world that wasn't hers? How could she survive this without losing herself in the process? It wasn't just the mansion's walls that confined her, it was him. She had no choice but to be a part of his world. Yet, every day, she fought the growing feeling that she was losing herself, little by little. She had never been one to sit idle. Never been one to just accept what was happening to her. But here, in this house, under his watchful gaze, she felt like a ghost, someone who wasn't truly living, just existing. One evening, as Tasha was making her way to the kitchen to grab a drink, she saw him again, standing in the hallway, his back to her, just as he had been so many times before. He turned as soon as she stepped into his line of sight, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them said anything. It was a silence that spoke volumes. He wasn't surprised to see her. He wasn't angry. He was simply observing. She was beginning to think that was all he ever did. Observe. You've been avoiding me, he said quietly, his voice as smooth and cold as ever. Tasha didn't flinch at his words, but the weight of them still pressed on her chest. She wasn't avoiding him. She was trying to survive him. Trying to survive the suffocating grip he had on her life. I haven't been avoiding you, she replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. I just don't know what you want from me. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them in one long stride. I've already told you what I want, he said, his voice low, almost gentle. I want you to trust me. I want you to understand that you have a place here. With me. She shook her head, frustration building in her chest. I don't belong here, she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. You don't get it. I don't belong in your world. I don't even know who you are. He smiled then, a small, almost knowing smile that sent a chill down her spine. You're here now, he said, his tone final. That's all that matters. You don't need to know everything about me. You just need to accept that I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. His words were a trap, and she could feel it closing around her. There was no escape from him. No escape from the life he had chosen for her. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Tasha took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. I don't want this, she whispered. I don't want any of this. I didn't ask for your world. I didn't ask for you. He didn't say anything immediately, just stood there, watching her with those dark, intense eyes. There was something in his gaze, something that made her feel like he was reading her every thought, every emotion, as if nothing was hidden from him. I know you didn't ask for this, he said after a moment, his voice soft, almost tender. But it doesn't matter. You're here, and you're a part of this now. You're part of me. Tasha felt her heart pound in her chest. His words were like a weight on her, sinking into her bones. She wanted to scream, to tell him that she wasn't his, that she didn't belong to him. But the more she fought it, the more it felt like he was right. She was already in his world. And no matter how hard she tried to fight it, she couldn't escape. He reached out then, his hand brushing gently against her arm. The touch was so soft, so unexpected, that she couldn't help but shiver. He stepped closer still, his breath warm against her ear. You're stronger than you think, Tasha, he whispered. And you'll see that soon enough. You'll see your place in all of this. His words were a promise, but it didn't feel like one of reassurance. It felt like a warning that her life, her future, was no longer hers to control. He had taken that control from her the moment she stepped into his world. And now, no matter what she did, no matter how hard she tried to push him away, she was a part of it. A part of him. And the scariest part? She wasn't sure she wanted to escape anymore. Not entirely. Tasha woke up the next morning with the weight of yesterday's conversation still hanging over her. She had been struggling to breathe through the suffocating reality of her situation. But as the hours passed, it became clear that her life had taken a sharp turn into a world she never wanted to be a part of. The man, the Mafia Boss, had made his claim. He had told her she was his now, that she was part of his world. The thought was maddening. Yet somehow, the more she resisted, the more she realized she was being pulled deeper into his grasp. The mansion was quiet as she walked through the halls, each room more luxurious than the last. But for Tasha, the opulence did nothing to ease the discomfort gnawing at her. She had always prided herself on her independence, but now, in the silence of the mansion, that independence felt like a distant memory. She stopped in front of the grand mirror in the hallway, staring at her reflection. Her face looked worn, the exhaustion evident in her eyes. The woman looking back at her was still the same, but everything had changed. She wasn't sure if she was still the person she had been before this all started. She didn't recognize the version of herself that had agreed to stay in this world. The world of danger, of power, of control. She had tried to push him away, tried to convince herself that she could leave, but the truth was clear now. She wasn't going anywhere. He had made sure of that. Tasha couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her the night before. The way his words had made her feel both insignificant and yet impossibly important. He had told her she was part of something bigger, that she had a place here. And as much as she hated it, part of her had started to believe him. She didn't know how to accept this life, but she knew one thing. She wasn't as free as she once thought. The world he lived in was dangerous. She had seen that in the way people acted around him, the fear in their eyes whenever he spoke. His power was undeniable, and now she was inextricably linked to it. She took a deep breath and walked toward the room where she knew he would be. He had summoned her once again. She didn't know what he wanted, but the certainty in his voice the night before had left her with no choice but to obey. She didn't even question it anymore. When she entered the study, the familiar tension in the air hit her like a wave. He was sitting behind the massive desk, his back to her as he looked out the window, deep in thought. She paused for a moment, watching him. He was always so composed, always so in control. His power, his presence, was overwhelming, and she felt small in comparison. But she wasn't here to feel small. She wasn't here to be intimidated. At least, that was what she kept telling herself. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the unease swirling in her stomach. He turned slowly, his eyes locking with hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both assessing each other, trying to figure out the other's next move. "You're quiet today," he finally said, his voice low, almost teasing. "Not much to say," she replied, standing her ground. "I'm still trying to figure out why I'm here. Why I'm still here, in your world." He didn't smile, but there was a glint in his eyes as he stood up and walked toward her. "You're here because I chose you," he said, his voice so calm, so certain. "And I don't make mistakes." Tasha clenched her fists at her sides, trying to ignore the way his words made her feel. She had been chosen? By him. It felt like an insult, like she was just another thing to possess. But she couldn't argue with him. She couldn't deny that she was in this now, that there was no escape. "I'm not sure I want to be part of this," she said, her voice quieter now, unsure of what she was even saying anymore. "I didn't ask for any of this." He was standing right in front of her now, his presence so close that it made her heart race. He didn't touch her, but the space between them was filled with tension. "You don't have to ask," he said, his voice still calm, but there was an edge to it. "You're already in it. You're a part of me now, whether you like it or not." His words struck her like a slap, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to be owned, to be trapped in this life that was so far removed from anything she had ever known. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something else. Something that made her hesitate. He wasn't just a monster. He wasn't just the terrifying man who controlled everything around him. There was something deeper there. Something that made her question her own feelings. She couldn't explain it. She didn't understand it. But somehow, she was drawn to him. "I don't know what you want from me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know why I'm still here." He reached out then, his hand resting gently on her arm. The touch was unexpected, but not unwelcome. For a brief moment, she felt something shift between them. Something more than just control. "You're here because you're stronger than you think," he said quietly. "And because I need you." Tasha didn't know what to say to that. She didn't know if she believed him. But the words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. And for the first time since she had walked into his world, she didn't feel quite as afraid. Tasha stood there, her heart still racing as the man's words echoed in her mind. "I need you." The weight of it hit her with a sudden clarity. She wasn't just caught in his world because of some fleeting decision. She wasn't just another part of his empire. He had chosen her, truly chosen her for something more. Her thoughts swirled in a haze as she tried to comprehend it all. The idea of being needed in this strange world, a world where power and control ruled, was as terrifying as it was intoxicating. It was unlike anything she had ever known. She had spent her entire life fighting to be independent, to carve out a space for herself in a world that often didn't care. And now, here she was, with the most powerful man she had ever encountered telling her she had a place beside him. The very idea seemed absurd, yet it made a part of her feel as though everything she had struggled for had led her here, to this exact moment. The room felt too small, too tight, and yet, it was as if everything outside of this space had ceased to exist. There was only him and her. The distance between them had closed, their closeness almost suffocating. But the odd thing was that, despite the storm of emotions in her chest, she didn't want to move away. She didn't want to escape anymore. The truth was, she didn't know how to. The walls were closing in, and the more she fought it, the more she realized she didn't want to fight anymore. His hand, still resting lightly on her arm, seemed to be the only thing grounding her in that moment. "You're not like the others," he said, his voice softer now, almost as if he were revealing something personal, something hidden beneath the walls he had built around himself. "You're different. You've always been different." Tasha looked up at him, her mind still reeling from the whirlwind of thoughts, yet she found herself focusing on his words, trying to understand them. She had always seen herself as just a survivor, nothing more. She had never felt important, never felt like she belonged to anyone or anything. But here he was, looking at her as though she held the key to something vital. She didn't know what it was, but the feeling was undeniable. "I'm not different," she whispered, almost to herself. "I'm just me." He shook his head slightly, a faint smile curling at the corner of his lips. "No, Tasha," he said quietly. "You're more than you think. You just haven't realized it yet." His words cut through her thoughts, but they didn't bring clarity. Instead, they brought confusion. What did he mean by that? Why was she here? She had spent so long just trying to survive, just trying to get by. She never wanted to be caught up in this world, in his world. But now, standing here in this room, facing him, she couldn't deny that a part of her was drawn to him, to this life, in a way she didn't fully understand. Her heart pounded in her chest as she searched his face, looking for some kind of answer, something that could explain why this all felt so inevitable. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice small but steady, trying to force some control over the situation. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence towering over her. "I want you to stop running from what you're meant to be," he said, his voice low but certain. "I want you to embrace it. Embrace me." His words were a command, not a request, and the weight of them sank deep into her chest. She could feel the pull of them, could feel the gravity of his gaze as it anchored her to this moment. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she couldn't deny that part of her, deep down, wanted to give in. She had spent so long fighting, so long trying to control everything in her life. But here, with him, it felt like there was nothing left to fight. "I'm not sure I can do that," she whispered, her voice shaky with uncertainty. "I'm not sure I can be what you want me to be." The man looked at her with an expression that was almost sympathetic, but there was no softness in his gaze. He was a man who had lived in a world of control, a world of power and violence. And yet, there was something about Tasha that made him pause. "You're already more than what you think you are," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You're already in this, whether you want to admit it or not." Tasha shook her head, frustration and confusion bubbling to the surface. "I didn't choose this," she said, her voice rising, almost pleading. "I didn't ask for any of this." He reached out then, his hand gently cupping her chin, lifting her face to meet his gaze. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the choices aren't ours to make. Sometimes, we're pulled into something greater than ourselves. And when that happens, we either accept it or we lose everything." His touch sent a shock through her, and she found herself caught in his gaze, unable to look away. She had been trying to hold on to something, some piece of herself that wasn't connected to him, to this world. But the more she tried to fight it, the more she realized that she was already lost. She was already a part of his world, whether she liked it or not. "You don't have to lose yourself," he said, as though reading her thoughts. "But you have to trust me. Trust that I won't let you go." Tasha closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She didn't know what to do anymore. She didn't know if she could trust him, if she could trust herself in this world that was so different from the one she had known. But she knew one thing: she couldn't escape him. And, deep down, a part of her didn't want to. In this captivating tale of power, love, and survival, Tasha's life takes an unexpected turn as she is drawn into a world of danger and luxury. From the moment she crosses paths with the mysterious Mafia Boss, she is caught in a web of emotions, control, and undeniable attraction. As the tension builds, Tasha begins to question her own strength, her purpose, and the price she must pay for being in this world. This is a story that combines passion and power in ways that make it a unique addition to romance stories. As the power dynamics shift and Tasha finds herself both drawn to and fearful of the man who claims her, she is forced to confront the truth about her own desires. But in a world of control and temptation, can she ever truly escape the pull of this dangerous man? Romance stories like this challenge traditional boundaries, offering a look at what happens when two seemingly different worlds collide. Tasha's journey unfolds with moments of vulnerability, strength, and love, revealing the complexities of finding trust in someone who holds so much power. As the story progresses, Tasha must navigate her feelings, learning that in this world, nothing is as it seems. Every moment of connection between her and the Mafia Boss builds the tension in this tale, making it a compelling addition to romance stories. By the end, Tasha must decide if she can live in a world that doesn't play by the rules, or if her desire for freedom will lead her down a different path. This story, full of twists, emotions, and undeniable chemistry, is the perfect fit for anyone who loves romance stories with a dark edge.